Sostanzialmente è un tentativo.
Essentially, mine is an attempt at describing the issue. So the issue has to do with the work carried out by banks, as well as the work carried out by surgeons. Let me say it quite openly, because and clearly, because we have here institutional, representatives of the institutions here in the audience. And this is a problem that did not exist until 25 years ago, very simply because corneal transplants had been in existence from an earlier time, but the work carried out by eye banks probably started only 25 or 30 years ago. So let's say that it is a relatively recent problem. So what does this mean? It means that in Italy we collect about 16,000, let me show you as a preview, data from last year. So 16,000 ocular tissues are collected in Italy per year. So you may see that the situation varies depending on the area of Italy. So the south, not much. In the center, it's a bit better. In northern Italy, probably we have the best situation. So this data has been also confirmed last year. So during last year, and this is data that were provided by the National Transplantation Center, so in Italy about 7,200 corneal transplants have been performed, and little more than 18,000 ocular tissues have been donated. So not much is being done actually in order to encourage donations, because I think we should use them better, because we probably should use more donated tissues, and then we should see whether these 7,000 and odd transplants actually met the Italian requirement. We do not have reliable statistics in this respect, but if you look at the situation in the United States, who have been exporting tissues for many years, so we may think that they have been able to satisfy, to meet their domestic requirement a lot long ago, say. So in Italy, I think we should at least perform 10,000 transplants per year. So we are talking about, after all, not too big figures on numbers, considering the size of our national health system. So I'm sure that the administrators, the managers of the national health system shouldn't be concerned. But something has changed, even in Italy, in the last few years. And if you see here these tables in the U.S. Between 2011 and 2012, classical transplants, so the number of these surgeries has been exceeded by lamellar surgeries. So these two figures are getting closer in Italy as well. And so I can confirm that in Italy, even in Italy last year, there has been about 3,000 lamella procedures were performed versus 3,200 PK. And this is a very important piece of data, because I believe that there is no way back, so no going back. So lamellar keratoplasty by now has become certainly the most widespread surgery when it comes to corneal transplants. This is very important today, if seen from the eye banking viewpoint, because the work of eye banks certainly has grown, and obviously this implied also a rise in related costs. These are the costs that some Italian eye banks distributing most of the tissues for transplants. And these are the costs which are defined and asked of the transplant centers every time a corneal transplant has been planned for. So the costs may range from 1,000 or 2,000 euros per transplant, depending on the type of grafting or the transplant, whether it is a PK or lamellar keratoplasty, endothelial one. That actually the endothelial procedures nowadays is more costly. Who pays? In Italy, we do have a national health system, so transplants are mainly, not exclusively, but mainly by public centers and accredited private centers. There is also a niche, I would say, of private centers performing them, but they are not significant in our perspective. So the costs have been defined on the basis of diagnosis-related groups, and at the national level, the cost associated with transplant surgery is the one that you may see here, 2,544.31 cents, so euros. And in Italy, of course, there are considerable differences from one region to another. We are a sort of a federal system, if you like, to a certain extent, and so regions have a certain degree of freedom in deciding what's the cost of the transplant surgery to be reimbursed. But a few years ago, something happened that actually paved the way to considerations having to do with costs not directly related with surgical activities. So there was a tariff had been set at 12,290 euros for limber stem cells that must be prepared in a lab before being grafted. And of course, this is something that is somehow related to transplants, but it's not a transplant itself. Now, this issue has been overcome because this has actually become a drug, of course, more costly. But in this case, the regional system, in agreement with the central government, decided that lab costs should be set as not having to do with the DRG costs. So, what's the situation in Italy? It's really highly varying depending on the regions, as I said you at the beginning, and I told you at the beginning. So in my region, Emilia-Romagna, the DRG costs have been remodulated, and so in a flexible way, let's put it this way, and this is applied heterogeneously. For instance, in Emilia-Romagna, a cost has been set for the regional eye bank, however, less than other costs is 750 euros per transplant, and procurement costs have been defined. So managing the donation of ocular tissue is a little less than 300 euros, and these costs are actually incorporated into the DRG cost for our region, which is 2,800. In the Veneto region, it has been reduced, the cost has been reduced, so 2,296 euros for pre-cut tissues, and there is an additional fee, let's say, considering the endothelial procedures, but only for patients coming from outside the region. So it's quite a heterogeneous and variable situation. I won't get into details. I just cut and pasted from a document that had been issued by our regional authorities to show how DRG costs may vary across the country, and the costs being higher in the north. And in most regions, these DRG costs do not take into account the work carried out by IBanks, and therefore the fees that the surgical centers have to pay to the IBanks. And this is an open issue that should be resolved, and I think it wouldn't be too expensive for the national health system, since we are talking about mostly, or at the most, about 10,000 surgeries per year. Diego, as you